Hey everybody, welcome to week number 5 here. We are going to learn how to count. Now some of you are probably thinking, but Mr. Roulette, really? We're going to learn how to count. We're 4th and 5th graders. We know how to do this. Yes, you do, but you may not know how to count in music, which is similar, but also a little bit different. So let's get going here. We are going to take a look at this screencast presentation that I'm doing for you, and we are going to try to figure out how we're going to count those various different rhythms in music and how all of that is going to work. We're going to review here first, ladies and gentlemen. In week 4, we learned that the definition of rhythm was a series of strong and weak elements. Hopefully you remember that. Hopefully that kind of jogs your memory here. We also learned that rhythm was closely associated with the term beat, and beat is a steady rhythmic pulse. That's why I snap my fingers or I use that metronome to create that steady beat to make sure that all of our rhythms are happening at the appropriate times. We also learned about those Dalcroze rhythm syllables, which sounds like a big fancy name, but really what those are is the syllables we use to represent each different note value in what's known as standard notation. Now I did throw that term at you, standard notation. It may not be one that you've heard. It's a very simple term to get a definition for. Standard notation is just music notation. That's all that it is. It is nothing more than the line, spaces, dots on a page that show you what you are supposed to play or sing and when to do that. In week 4, we also learned about 2 different elements of rhythm, the note and the rest. So we've got those 2 right there, everybody. The note, please remember, refers to the element of rhythm that produces sound. Notes are the things that you hear. It can be longer or shorter depending on the note type. The rest refers to an element of rhythm that produces silence. So if note is sound, the rest must then be silence. It can be also longer or shorter, depending again on the rest type. Each note or rest has its own unique length, which is referred to as a number of beats. Let me move my video out of the way here for a second. There we go. Number of beats. So let's put me actually up here in the top. Sorry, everybody. Put my video somewhere else here to try to keep it out of the way a little bit more for you. Sorry about that. Here we go. We're going to continue. Oops, back. So these right here are all the notes. These are the ones that are going to produce sound, and this is going to show us a very quick rundown on what all these notes are. Please feel free to refer to this slide at any time in this video. So take a look at the timestamp, make sure you know where this is. You can pause it, you can use that as a reference. So over there on the left side, we have the quarter note, which does say ta for our rhythm syllable. It receives 1 beat inside a measure, and that number sign right there is what we're going to be focusing on today. That is going to be how we count it. Now the number sign refers to the number of the beat that is inside that measure where that quarter note is going to exist. We'll get into that a little bit more in just a few moments, but for right now I want you to just remember the quarter note is just the number of the beat that it falls on. The half note right there in the middle at the top is the open circle with the stem coming off of it. We say ta. We want to extend that to 2 beats because that is how long the half note lasts. 2 beats long, ta, 2 beats of sound. The 2 number signs that you have right there are going to be referring to the number that the note starts on and that it ends on. Now this is important because if you can see right there, there are 2 number signs and the half note receives 2 beats. So that means that you are going to have both the first and the second number of the beat. Remember, it's not always just 1 and 2. It is the first and second number of the beat. And this is really important here too. Look what it says. Only the first number is said. So we do not say both numbers. It is just the first number of that pattern. Again, keep it in mind. We're going to go into this in just a few slides here. The whole note, ta, 4 beats long. And the counting for this one is actually very easy. It is 1, 2, 3, and 4 all connected by a hyphen. And what that tells us is that all 4 of those numbers are part of one note. They are attached together, so they all work together to be the counting pattern for that note. Now it says there, only the first number is said. So we can do this one because it's not a variable. It doesn't change. When we have a whole note in a measure, it's always going to be the same counting pattern because we only have 4 beats in the measure right now. So we have those 4 numbers taking place. So if we are only going to say the first number, we're going to make it last for 4 beats, but we're only going to say the number 1. So it would be 1, which sounds a little silly, but it takes up all 4 beats and it tells you that that note starts on the number 1, the first beat of that measure. Moving down here, these ones are a little bit more complicated. We're going to dig into these a little bit later on. We're not going to work on eighth notes for this lesson. I want to introduce them. And then in week 6, we are going to dig into how to count eighth notes. So the eighth notes, the pair right there on the left-hand side with the beam going across them, does use the syllable TT, and it receives 1 beat because each of those eighth notes receives half of a beat. And if you have 2 halves, they come together to make 1 whole. Now the counting pattern is going to be the number of the beat that it is on, along with that plus sign right there, which signifies the word and. So the first eighth note in the group is going to be the number of the beat where it exists. The second eighth note in the group is always going to be the plus sign signifying the word and. So push the save button on that one, and we're going to come back to it a little bit later on. The single eighth note is the last note we're going to talk about right now because I introduced it in previous weeks here. And it says T. It is that shorter syllable, and it gets half of a beat. So it is not 1 whole beat, it's a fraction, it is half a beat, making it a very short note. So for this one, this is where it might get a little bit confusing for you right now, but again, this is going to be file it away up here in your little musical filing cabinet, and we're going to come to it later on here. So it's either going to be the number or the and. It is not both of them anymore. It is number or and. So again, save button, and we are going to come back to that a little bit later on. Here's another page that you may want to pause and study for a while here once we get done talking about all of this, or just find the timestamp on this one as well. So if you need to refer back to it, you are more than welcome to do so. So the rests. The first one that we see, that kind of squiggly line right up there in the top left corner, is the quarter rest. It says shh, and we give it 1 beat. Now, very much like the quarter note, it is just the number of the beat that it falls on, but this time we are going to place that number inside of parentheses, those 2 curved lines right there, that are going to tell us that rather than say that out loud, we are just going to think that number. Now, like I said in previous lessons, rests get beats. That means that they need to exist in the measure. Now, even though we're not going to count the number out loud for any of our rests, we do need to make sure that we are giving it that space. We are thinking that number in our head and being respectful of that beat that is meant to be silent. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of notes that are all together with no silence to break them up. So moving over here, we have the half rest, which looks like it is a hat that could go on your head. So remember, that's a good way to remember that one. The syllable for that, shh, we are going to create 2 beats of silence. Now, if you think back to the previous slide talking about the half note, we had those 2 number signs that were attached together by a hyphen. The half rest works exactly the same way. It's going to have the number that it starts on and the number that it finishes on attached by that hyphen right there to make sure that we know that those numbers go together. Again, they are inside parentheses, showing that those numbers are to be thought rather than said. So the whole rest is the last one. And remember that trick, we're walking along and we fall in the hole? That means that it's going to be underneath that line. So the whole rest is 4 beats of silence. So shh, there's 4 beats right there. Now again, like our whole note, because it is taking up 4 beats and that's all that we're putting inside our measures at this point, we are going to be able to count that as 1, 2, 3, and 4 all attached with hyphens. Now obviously you're going to think those numbers, so you can think all 4 of them. That's fine. However, you do need to realize that those 4 numbers are part of one group. That's why those hyphens are there, rather than thinking, oh, I can just say 1, 2, 3, 4 in my head. Yes, of course you can. But you also need to make sure you remember that those are part of that whole rest, which is 4 beats all together. So now we're going to dig into this counting stuff that the lesson is really about. So in music, we count rhythms to learn how to better perform them. Each measure contains a set number of beats and is controlled by the time signature. Counting allows us to see where in the measure each note or rest is supposed to exist. So it's a great way to be able to figure out where our notes are going to go and be able to perform them better without having to say all the rhythm syllables first. Both methods are correct. Both methods work really well. But if you decide to go into band or choir when you go to middle school, counting is going to be a much better option for you because they use that there to show you exactly where those beats are supposed to line up. So here comes how to count. Now again, yes, you know how to count. But music counting works just a smidge different, and I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. Now the first step, look at the time signature. The time signature is going to tell us how many beats are in the measure and therefore what number we are counting up to. So the time signature controls all the measures in a piece of music, which means that the number that's there at the very beginning is what all the measures are. I mean, unless it changes, which it's not going to for our purposes right now. It's going to tell you how many beats are in each measure, and like I said, therefore, how many you're going to count up to make sure you have complete measures. The second step is to always begin at number 1. Each measure will begin on beat number 1. So just because you've counted to 4 does not mean you continue on to 5 or 6. We do not go there. We always start back at 1 and go back to the beginning of the next measure. So just like counting objects, like I said, we start at 1. The difference is, though, that we do not continue on past 4 for right now. So counting in music, for you math folks, is very similar to using a number line. Each note or rest has its own position inside that measure, just like those numbers on a line. Now this would be a number line that only has 4 dots on it, putting those things inside those positions. But it's a good analogy for those of us that remember number lines from math. So take a look at the rhythm that's right there. We're going to do an example here together so that hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. Now this rhythm right here consists of a half note, a quarter rest, and a quarter note. We are in 4/4 time. Now if we add up the note values, we can see that the measure is complete because it adds up to 4, the top number of the time signature. 2 for the half note, plus 1 for the quarter rest, plus 1 for the quarter note equals 4. Now, one thing to make sure you note, counting is not just stating the number of beats that each note or rest receives. Yes, we did it here, but that's to illustrate that we have 4 beats inside our measure, and therefore that's what we are counting up to. So when we count a rhythm, we always start at the number 1, starting on the left-hand side of the measure. We are in 4/4, so that means again that we are counting up to 4. As we know, half notes receive 2 beats, outlined in purple right there. So that means that the half note is going to take up beats 1 and 2 inside our measure. Because if we have 4 there, We put 2 together. We take those 2 away. That's 1 and 2. To notate this, we're going to use both numbers of beats attached by a hyphen. So that means that 1 and 2 are going to be next door to each other, and they are going to be attached by a hyphen. Please notice that this does mimic the syllable ta'a. That has a hyphen there as well. And remember, the arrow right there is denoting that we only say the first number of the half note because it's one long sound, not 2 short sounds. We don't say 1, 2. You can still hear the change. You can hear that it moves. But if you say 1 and you have that second beat as part of the long 1 sound, that's going to tell us that it's a half note. Next is the quarter rest right there. We learned that the quarter rest represents 1 beat of silence. So now we've already used up beats 1 and 2. So that means that those are gone. Those are no longer able to be used because the half note is taking up that space. So the next notation is going to have to start on the next number in order, which is beat number 3. So this is where the quarter rest is going to fall. Now again, because rests are silent, we put them inside parentheses to show that we're going to think the number rather than say it. So far we've got beats 1 and 2 for our half note and beat 3 for our quarter rest. Now the final notation that we see is the quarter note, which receives 1 beat, right there outlined in purple. Very much like the quarter rest, we're going to use just the number of the beat that the quarter note falls on. However, we don't need parentheses because the quarter note produces sound. So, this example shows us that the quarter note is on beat number 4 because 1, 2, and 3, all 3 of those beats have already been taken up by another note. Beats 1 and 2 together are your half note. Beat 3 is your quarter rest, so therefore the only number left in 4/4 time is beat number 4. Now because we have reached the number 4, we are finished counting that measure. So if we were to count this out loud, we would have 1, 4. Now if you did syllables for that, you would have the exact same sound. Ta, sh, ta. Now yes, we do put the shush sound in there, and we thought the number 3. Minor difference, but if you think about it, those are exactly the same length. Those rhythms are exactly the same. So counting and rhythm syllables are very closely related. All right, good job, everybody. So the next thing that we are going to do is get some practice with this. So please head on over to the next part of the lesson, and we will get going with practicing how to count.